looking at is the actual construction, the physical construction, why we made it, how form and function really blend together to create a great puppet stage for you. First and foremost, we take a look at is this guy is solid. It's actually framed out like a house. We're actually using 2x4 construction. The great thing about that is we're able to do a lot more. If we all of a sudden want to change something around, we want to widen this, things like that, we're going to be able to, just because we have that solid construction in which to do that. Some of the reasons why we took a look at building the different stages, the different platforms, things like that, is we want to make sure that we can play to the entire audience. We want to make sure that one part of the audience isn't secluded from the actual show. Now here we happen to have our fence scene. With our fence scene, all this is on the front, basically just a little terrace. I mean, very, very simple to make. The reason why we made it this height, your height needs to be anywhere between 38 inches and maximum 43 inches. And the reason that is when a puppeteer is back behind, either sitting in a chair or on their knees, you want to make sure that their bicep is pretty much at a parallel angle to the ground. The problem is if we go up too much, then all of a sudden your blood loss and blood flow basically, and your hand starts to numb after about 5 minutes. And then also we don't want it too low because then all of a sudden we're using our front muscle instead of our bicep to actually support us. Another great reason is when we take a stool, the stool is a perfect height because sitting in a chair sometimes just doesn't look right. Where if all of a sudden we're sitting in a stool, I could do this and have a conversation with our puppet, with Gordy and with Gertie, and we sit here and we have this nice conversation, and the kids not only get a full frontal view of myself, but then also I'm able to interact very well with our puppets at this height. Here when we take a look at the fencing, again, the fencing is nothing more than an illusion. We do have nice little wood strips on here, and they're 1 inch by 1/4 inch, and all they are is little strips. They're normally used for spacers. All we did was we bought these, cut them down at not even a 45-degree angle. We just cut them down kind of as we needed. We painted them white, and then we left the screws actually black in there. All that does is give a little more sense of realism, that this is a true real fence. It creates a great illusion, a great 3D illusion, that this is something different than what we've seen before. When we originally thought about designing our puppet stage, one of the first ideas that came to mind was kind of a 1950s, 60s, the Little Rascals clubhouse type thing, to where we actually have a treehouse, we have a clubhouse. This is a boys only, you know, no girls allowed type clubhouse, and so this is really the cornerstone of this puppet stage. When we take a look at it, again, we're solid construction, so you don't have to worry about any of that, and all we've done is we've created an opening or a balcony for that clubhouse, and then using very, very simple materials, we're able to, again, create that illusion of a much bigger or even a much more elaborate clubhouse. Now, something that you're going to notice, surprise, surprise, is we're using that same stripping that we used on our fencing. Now, all of a sudden, we just used regular stain and then nailed it in a very irregular fashion. Again, we're able to create that 3D depth right in there. Now this part, what we've actually done is we've left this part blank. This is where you can either put a sign, you know, Gordy's Clubhouse, or the name of your kids program, or what you can do as well is you can actually create a flower box with flowers, things like that, just to enhance, again, that realism. Something that you notice is, as well, is we're going to be right around that 40 inches that we've talked about on the fence line. And the reason, again, why we do that is not only does it create a good uniform viewing angle for all the kids, but then also what we're able to do is we're able to still be comfortable with that. Now with this, on the inside, we have a little more space, and so we've actually created an armrest for a puppeteer. Professionally, I'm going to say it's not supposed to be done, but you know what? It's with children's ministry, we take it to a different level, and so we went ahead, and for ease of use, we went ahead and threw that in there. One of the other alternates that we've decided to do is actually a birdhouse for Albie. And the birdhouse we created, if you notice, all it is just in the crook of a tree. We took a very, very irregular shape and went ahead and cut that out. And then as you can see, the paint accents that as well. Another little additive that we did is we took a little bird nest that we purchased at a local hobby store. It's meant for decoration. And then all we did was we cut it in half with scissors. And basically all we did was super glue pieces onto here to, again, give the realism of Albie's nest. The great thing about this as well is as I'm standing here, now all of a sudden, as you notice, we're a much higher height. because again, a bird's not going to live on the ground, and so this gives our presenters definitely a great way to sit here and interact. Also, as the presenter talks to the kids, things like that, the puppet is back behind their left shoulder, and the puppet's going to be able to have fun. It's kiss them on the cheek, you know, that kind of stuff. And so they're able to interact very, very well with the puppets as well. Now, when we take a look at it, we also have another hole up here, actually up in the top of the tree. And it's just to simulate, with the birds, definitely what we're able to do is actually pop up out of the top of the tree, do something funny, fall down potentially. All that does is it gives you another avenue to do something else. It gives you another opportunity to pop a puppet out, to have a conversation up there. Now, again, this isn't a great way to present to the crowd because it's a very hard angle. But for a comedic effect, for another drama effect, it's a great way just to have another avenue to be able to pop up, do your thing, pop back down, and then come into one of the regular puppet stage areas. Now, this is where your artistic touch gets to come into place a little bit. We do have some kind of wall space that we want to cover up because, again, we want to make it realistic, but we want to make sure it's not too busy, especially to where this is the lower part of where a presenter is going to stand when they're going to be talking with Albie. And so instead, what we want to do is just paint some graphics on here. Very easily, you could use some of the other graphics that we take a look at for our puppet sets, or if you just want to create a couple flowers, some grass, maybe a sunflower, just something very minor, but definitely it kind of adds that space to it. What we're going to be talking about here is the scrim. Now, in a theatrical sense, what a scrim does is actually hides the puppeteer from the audience. A regular scrim, or actual true theatrical scrim, is going to be anywhere, we found it between $60 and about $100 per yard. Instead, the alternative that we use is actually broadcloth. Broadcloth you can get from your local fabric store, and a black broadcloth normally costs right around $2 a yard. Now, something that's very important, we just want to make sure that more light is on the front of the stage than the back of the stage. As you're going to notice, when I turn this light on, you're going to be able to see me very clearly. So hopefully now that you can see me very clearly, you realize the importance of what the scrim, what the broadcloth can actually do. So just by turning off the light back behind here, I disappear. So it's very important that you want to make sure it's darker behind the stage than it is in front. When we take a look at it with the scrim from the inside out, this is kind of the view that you're going to see. Now, what you are going to see is, you can't see every detail on my face, but what you are going to be able to do is you're going to be able to react to a presenter that happens to be sitting right next to you, or the great thing is you can even react to a child. If a child is moving this way or that way, or raising their hand, or things like that, as a puppeteer, you're going to be able to see that and actually direct your head one way or the other based on whether a child is asking a question, doing this or doing that. That broadcloth still gives you that great view that we're able to see out, but they can't see in. The first thing that you're going to notice in here, again, it looks very much like the framed inside of a house. We have our studs, we have our paneling, we have everything going up. And again, very, very solid. This is a solid puppet stage. Something that you're going to notice is everything's painted black. The reason why we do that, of why we have so much black paint, is, again, we already talked about it with the scrim, we want to make sure it's as dark in here as possible. Again, when we use our black paint, we want to make sure we use flat black paint. That's kind of fun to say. And the reason why we do that is if we use gloss paint, that's going to reflect any light that happens to escape in here, and we want to make sure that we don't have that possibility. Something as sturdy as this puppet stage is, it's actually movable. That was one of the requirements that we had, is to make sure that we can actually tear it down and pull it back again. Now, with that said, it's not easy to tear it down, but what you can do is actually you have 4 separate panels. You have our main panel here, which houses the clubhouse. You have your other panel here that houses the fence, and all that is held together with 2 screws here going down, and then we actually have 2 separate pieces up top with your angle, basically. And to take those apart, all we do is we take this board off. There's 2 or 3 screws holding each one on, and that's it. Then we are able to carry each one of those out. Again, not something that's fun to do, but if we have to do it, definitely we are able to do it. Something we want to make sure that we do is that we have a very comfortable space back here for our puppeteers. Now, a lot of times when we build sets and design sets, the problem that we do is we don't give enough room for puppeteers back here. As you can see, I'm 6 foot tall, about 200 pounds, I still have plenty of room to move in here, especially if another puppeteer was doing something. I would be able to move around, get myself ready and get in position. But then also something else that's important is we want to make sure that we have enough room when we're actually kneeling down. The width of this puppet stage from actually stud to stud is 3 feet, 3 feet on the schnoz. Sometimes you have to cut that down a little bit. I would not go any lower than 2'6", and I'm going to show you why. Now when we take a look at it, when I'm kneeling at the clubhouse, I'm able to still put my arm here, but then the problem is why we want to take a look at a minimum of 2.5 feet is if you see where my knees are and all the way where my feet are, I only have about 6 inches worth of space. And so at the 3 foot mark, it gives me a very nice window to be able to move, to be able to shift positions, to sneak around back here. It also allows other people to walk back in here as well to get ready for their puppet script, things like that. If we go any smaller than 2'6", the problem is then all of a sudden I'm doing puppeteering on the side. And it's very uncomfortable, and it also limits your range and movement of what direction the puppet can face. Now when we took a look at storage and design, one of the nice things, our main characters, we want to make sure that we have on hand at all times, as a just in case. You never know when all of a sudden Gordy needs to pop up, or Albie, or any one of our other characters that are kind of our mainstay. So what we've done is we've created, just with actually a 1 inch by 3.5 inch board, and so we actually tacked that on, and then we took dowels, cut them at a 45-degree angle, and glued and screwed those into the back, and now all of a sudden we have our puppet dowel rods. We take a look at it, we're able to store our puppets in an upright position, and so we want to make sure that the dowel rods will actually go all the way down onto the puppet. Not only does it free up some space for other things, but then also it utilizes the space that we've naturally created with our framing. All right, now what we're taking a look at, we're going to take this blank board and we're going to take it from this to this. First thing we have to do is actually create the vision. But what I like to do, especially since everything's going to get covered up by markers anyways, I kind of like just to sketch out my idea. Now this is not going to be anything fancy, it's going to be a very rough skeleton of kind of what's inside my head. I want to get it out on this canvas a little bit. And so again, it doesn't have to be anything super complicated. All we're doing is kind of just laying it out a little bit of an idea. Is that all of a sudden we want a tree branch coming up, going into our leaves. So now that we have our sketch done, what we want to do next is grab a hardware cloth and actually start cutting. First thing that you always want to do, again, we've already mentioned that you want to make sure you have safety gloves, thick leather gloves. Any type of thicker leather gloves are going to work. And we want to grab our hardware cloth and we want to imagine the shape a little bit. And again, we only want half the shape that we're imagining. And then what we're going to do is just going to be cutting down through here and then trimming it up as needed. Now that we have our piece of hardware cloth cut to a rough dimension, what we're actually going to do is we're going to find out on our tree branch, we're going to find the top edge of the tree branch, and then what we're going to do is lay one edge going up from the top of that tree branch. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to staple it right kind of along the design of what we're planning. Okay, now that that piece is done, we're actually going to take and fold it over, giving us our circle shape or our cylindrical shape. And then what we're going to do is kind of just flatten it out, and we're going to find the other edge roughly of our drawing. And then if you notice, I'm just going to squish the hardware cloth and I'm going to staple right down the line. This is one of the reasons why we chose to use hardware cloth. And so what we're able to do is actually bend that shape out, and we're actually able to take it, we can move it. If one of our staples come loose, all we do is restaple and we're good to go. So now all of a sudden we have a little cylindrical view of our tree branch. So now again, you start to envision that tree branch coming up. So now all of a sudden that next piece needs to be a little bit thinner than this one, and then it also needs to come up at an angle. So now that we have our hardware cloth cut, we're going to go through the same process, making sure we always use the leading edge on the same side. When you do all of a sudden get down to here, you may have to cut and just make about a 1 inch to 1.5 inch cut into here. And what that's going to do is actually help kind of fan that out and join these two pieces together. And then from there, we're going to create our shape. So now we have our big branch going into a smaller branch with an opportunity for a knot hole left over. So now this is when we want to start looking at using some of our scraps. Just something right off the ground, something about the right size. And what I'm going to do is just cut about a foot and a half, and I'll probably end up trimming that down. And then what we want is about a 1 inch wide strip. And 1 inch is going to be roughly about 4 squares of hardware cloth here. So it's going to look like a strip very similar to this. All I'm going to do is just wrap it up like this. Very easy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take one edge from my cylinder, from my wrapping, and actually just wrap it and kind of clip it in like that. So now all of a sudden we have a circle shape. And then all we're going to do is imagine where this goes, and all we're going to do is throw one screw in there. Or sorry, one staple in there. You'll see as we go along how that knot is going to take life. Now what we're going to be doing here is we're actually going to be creating our leaves. What we're going to be doing just a hair different than this is we're going to create our leading edge on the bottom now. And then also what we're going to be able to do is we're going to make a much flatter type of form. We don't want it quite as round. And so here, we're just going to kind of lay this guy right up next to there. And again, now our leading edge is at the bottom, because that's where we want the rounded motion of the leaves. And as we come up top, instead of doing a cylindrical, what we're going to do is we're going to leave it as much bigger. And so here, again, what we want to do is actually round this guy even more. How we're going to do that is we have a very nice shape here. To make these edges rounded, all we're going to do is make 1, 2, 3 cuts. Basically all these are done in about an inch depth. You can do them as little or as much as you want. I like about an inch just for the simple fact that it gives me some room to play with. And it also allows me to kind of create a good shape with this as well. Sometimes you definitely want to do it at an angle. Remember, just create. Don't forget, we're going to be covering all this with papier-mâché here in a minute anyways. When we take a look at it, as our branch comes up, now we've created 3 sets of leaves. And then also, something that you'll notice is I purposely left a space right in here. And the reason why we did that is we're going to create the illusion. Our leaves are going to come in and down on top of our tree branch. Our other leaves are going to cover over top. And so what we're actually going to do is take this area and we're physically going to draw with paint the continuation of the branch. So it goes from a 3D down into a 2D. Somehow, or the way that we're going to be able to make that happen a little bit more is, again, the same way that we rounded our edges. We're going to take and we're going to cut probably only about a 1/2 inch this time, kind of all the way around the edge, 2 or 3 cuts of the tree branch, and then we're just going to, again, mold those in. So this is the basics. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more pieces onto here, and then we're ready to papier-mâché. Before we start, what we're going to need is water, and I actually prefer warm water. It helps the plaster of Paris set up a little bit. Some dry plaster of Paris, and then also some newspaper. What I want you to do is actually follow the directions on the plaster of Paris for actual mixing. And so when we take a look at it, when we take our shred of about 1 inch newspaper and we dip it in here, what we want it to do is we want it to be covered but not overly goopy. And then what we're going to be doing is starting from the top, and then what we're going to do is actually we're just going to work it around, making sure that we overlap the edges. Now when we finally get to the edges, it's okay to overlap some of these edges that will actually go onto the wood. Because you don't have to worry about that, because again, we're going to cover that with paint, and we're going to cover that with a little more texture. As we are finishing up with the leaves, we should notice on the bottom of our mixing tray is it's starting to get clumpy, starting to get a little messy, starting to get very, very thick on us. What we're actually going to do is we're going to take that, and that's what we're going to create our tree bark with. So let's scoop a little of that up in our hands, and we're going to smear it on there, because again, on the tree branch, we want that extra texture. On the leaves, we want it smooth though, so don't add any texture to those leaves. Okay, so now we finished up our papier-mâché. What we see is with our papier-mâché, we're starting to get our form and our vision. Now don't forget, later on, we're actually going to be painting to do a little bit more detail to create a little more 3D. Now something, if you remember, when we created this, we left a little space up here in the branches. The reason we did that is now again, we have our tree trunk coming up, and now all of a sudden we have our leaves, and so what we're going to end up doing is painting the tree branch continuing up there. Sometimes we put a split in there, sometimes we just take it solid, straight up, depending on what our leaves look like. Also something you're going to notice at this point, you have a very solid tree right now. Something that I like to do is with the tree, obviously when we gooped on the extra texture basically, something that I like to do as well is kind of do the same thing up here. Is we want to make sure that we're solid, we want to make sure that that we're completely covered with the papier-mâché. And now we're ready for some paint. When we're taking a look at painting, something that I always recommend with the plywood especially, it's not only going to save you a little bit of time, but it's going to save you some paint as well, is you always want to prime your plywood. This protects the wood and also ensures that you get a good, even coat when you're going on with your next level of paint. Now, don't forget, with this, we're not being a Picasso here. All we have to do is get close. If we get a little paint on the papier-mâché, it doesn't really matter, because don't forget, all of this is going to get covered up by another coat of paint. So as close as possible. If we miss a little wood, if we get a little paint on the papier-mâché, definitely not a big deal. One of the first things that you're going to want to do when painting is, again, keep that vision in mind. You want to take a look at where the tree starts, where the leaves start, where the sky even starts. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to start off with our darkest color of paint first. And so you always want to go dark to light, because then what that's going to do is actually create the shadows for you. Now again, on this dark, the first layer basically, choose a little bit of darker paint than you actually were thinking about making your tree. And then what we're going to do is, over the next couple layers and details, we're actually going to make this, the darkness, part of more the accent more than anything else. Now when we start taking a look at detail, imagine what an actual tree is going to look like. And so you want to kind of think in your brain, think in your mind, what and where the accents and the highlights are going to be. And so when we take a look at it as on the front of that, we're just going to add a couple highlights here. We're going to add just some area here. Anything where the texture is a little bit higher than the other, let's just go ahead and throw a little bit on. Now we don't want to go overboard here, but we want to make sure we kind of stay with the contour of the tree. And then what we're doing is just adding these little visual pieces. Now the great thing about this is we can always add and take a little away, but we want to make sure that we're still staying with kind of the form and function of the tree again. We want to make sure that it's actually looking like your bark, and it's creating that look that you're going for. Hopefully by now it's starting to kind of come together for you, and you're starting to be able to see where the tree is definitely popping out, and definitely that it's taking that shape that you originally designed, that we originally sketched out. Now when we take a look at it, don't forget we're going to be completing this entire project. The great thing that you're going to do is, as our tree trunk comes up, we're going to be adding a little more detail to that, and then also with our trees, something that we're going to do is we're actually going to add a little more detail on our shadowing. We're going to create in their background maybe some image of some other green leaves. And then also, don't forget, we're going to be painting the sky blue, and then also potentially painting some grass green down on the bottom. let's show you some clips of our final project of how it's going to end up. When we take a look at it, here's our final product. We have our tree branch coming up. We have our tree branch extending. We have our knot here. We have different types here. We have more of our billowy type of leaves, again here. Also, this really shows you the effect of the tree branch coming up, 3D'ing going into the leaves, and then all of a sudden we have the painted version back on here. So this is just painted right on the wood there, but it definitely gives you that 3D effect. As we take a look at it, you can see different types of shapes, and really now that you know the secrets of how to create that with the hardware cloth, you can see exactly how they're done. What I want you to do is just use your imagination and a little creativity, and what we're going to do is we're going to create one of these that's unique to your church.